I never expected my life to implode on a random Tuesday afternoon. But there I was, staring at photos scattered across my kitchen counter, each one a dagger to my heart. My husband Nolan, the father of my 5-year-old son, locked in various embraces with a woman I'd never seen before. My name is Harper, and until 10 minutes ago, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. The manila envelope had arrived without a return address, just my name written in block letters. At first, I'd assumed it was paperwork from one of my fitness clients. "Mommy, can I have apple juice?" Oliver's voice snapped me back to reality. I quickly swept the photos into the envelope and shoved it under a stack of mail. "Sure, baby." My voice came out steadier than I felt. I grabbed his favorite Superman cup from the cabinet, grateful for the mundane task to keep my hands from shaking. The timestamps on the photos were from last week, when Nolan claimed he was working late at the restaurant. The woman wore a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. They were leaving some upscale place downtown, his hand on the small of her back, both of them laughing at something I couldn't see. "When's Daddy coming home?" Oliver asked, juice dribbling down his chin. I wiped his face with a paper towel. "Later, sweetie. He's got a busy night at the restaurant." The restaurant, the source of endless family drama since we'd married into the Decker dynasty 6 years ago. Nolan's mother Lorraine never missed a chance to remind me how the place had been in their family for 3 generations. How they'd never needed outside help before until her precious son married a fitness instructor. My phone buzzed. Speaking of the devil, a text from Lorraine. "Family dinner tomorrow night. No excuses this time. Tessa and Grant will be there."
Great.
Just what I needed, an evening with my judgmental mother-in-law and sharp-tongued sister-in-law. Tessa, younger than me by 4 years, but somehow always managing to make me feel like an awkward teenager. I typed back a quick, "We'll be there," before I could change my mind. Maybe it was masochistic, but I needed to see Nolan in person, to watch his face, to know if he'd look at me differently now that I knew. "Mommy, can we do superhero poses?" Oliver's question pulled me from my dark thoughts. Our nightly ritual practicing power poses that were really just modified yoga stretches. "Of course, Superman." I managed to smile, dropping into a warrior pose beside him. As we stretched, I caught our reflection in the sliding glass door. My son, all gangly limbs and infectious enthusiasm. Me holding it together by a thread. The garage door rumbled open downstairs. Nolan was home early. "Daddy." Oliver abandoned our poses and raced toward the stairs. I stayed frozen in place, listening to their muffled greetings below. My husband's voice drifted up, warm and familiar. The same voice that had promised to love me forever. The same voice that had probably whispered sweet nothings to the woman in red just days ago. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. I straightened up, squaring my shoulders. Nolan appeared in the doorway, Oliver perched on his hip. He smiled at me, that easy, charming smile that had first won me over at the gym where we met. "Hey babe," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. He smelled like expensive cologne, not his usual brand. "Sorry I'm late. The supplier meeting ran long." I met his eyes, searching for
What?
guilt.
Shame?
All I saw was the same confident mask he always wore. "No problem," I replied, my voice perfectly neutral. "How was your meeting?" "Productive." He set Oliver down. "Think we might have found a way to turn things around at the restaurant." I thought about the envelope hidden under the mail, about tomorrow's family dinner, about all the lies stacking up between us, like a house of cards. "That's great," I said. "I'm sure your mother will be thrilled to hear all about it tomorrow night." Something flickered across his face, so brief I almost missed it. Fear? Or just my imagination? Either way, I was about to find out exactly what kind of man I'd married. The Decker family mansion always felt like a museum, beautiful, cold, and full of things I wasn't supposed to touch. I smoothed Oliver's cowlick one last time before ringing the doorbell, the manila envelope burning a hole in my purse. Lorraine answered the door in her signature pearls and disapproval. "Harper, dear, that outfit is interesting for a family dinner." Her eyes swept over my black dress, the one I'd specifically chosen for its conservative cut. And Oliver, darling, come give grandmother a kiss. Oliver hung back, clinging to my leg. Smart kid. Where's Nolan? I asked, following her into the formal dining room. Running late, as usual. Lorraine's lips tightened. The restaurant dash. Is doing just fine, mother. Tessa's voice cut through the room as she emerged from the kitchen, wine glass in hand. Her husband Grant trailed behind her like a well-trained shadow. Though I'm sure Harper's exercise videos are thriving. I bit back a retort about how my exercise videos helped pay for the restaurant's new wine cellar. Instead, I smiled. They are, actually. Just hit 50,000 subscribers. Tessa's perfectly plucked eyebrows arched. How lovely. Though I do worry about Oliver, with you being so busy. She turned to Lorraine. Remember when mothers actually raise their children? Grant cleared his throat. Tess.
What?
I'm just concerned about my nephew. She ruffled Oliver's hair as he passed. It must be hard, having a mommy who cares more about her Instagram followers than family time. My fingers itched to pull out the photos, to ask if she knew about the woman in red. But Oliver was watching, absorbing every word with those big brown eyes. Oliver, why don't you show Grant your new superhero drawings? I suggested. Grant shot me a grateful look and led Oliver to the living room. Speaking of family time, Lorraine interjected, the country club's annual gala is next month. The Deckers have hosted for 3 generations. 4, Tessa corrected. And this year's theme is legacy. She smirked. Though I suppose that's not really your area, Harper. Being new money and all. The front door opened, saving me from responding. Nolan's voice echoed through the foyer, followed by the click of high heels that definitely weren't his. Hope you don't mind, he called out. I brought someone from the restaurant. This is Madison, our new events coordinator. The woman who walked in wore a familiar red dress. My stomach dropped. Tessa's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Even Lorraine looked caught off guard. Madison was younger than me, with a kind of confidence that came from never having to doubt your place in the world. Mrs. Decker, thank you for having me. She extended a manicured hand to Lorraine. Nolan's told me so much about your family's legacy. Of course he had. Daddy. Oliver ran in from the living room, breaking the tension. Nolan scooped him up, but his eyes were on me, watching for my reaction. I kept my face neutral, even as bile rose in my throat. Madison, lovely to meet you. That's a beautiful dress. Oh, thank you. She beamed. Nolan actually helped me pick it out when we were discussing the gala plans last week. Beside me, Tessa made a small choking sound. How thoughtful of him, I said, reaching for my water glass. My husband has excellent taste. The dinner that followed was excruciating. Madison dominated the conversation with plans for modernizing the restaurant's image. Lorraine nodded along, clearly impressed. Tessa kept shooting strange glances between Nolan and me, while Grant studied his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Only Oliver seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, happily making his broccoli talk to each other. Harper, Madison turned to me. Nolan mentioned you're in fitness. Maybe we could collaborate on some health-focused events at the restaurant. Before I could respond, Tessa jumped in. Oh, I don't think Harper's brand quite aligns with the Decker image. Right, Mother? Lorraine dabbed her lips. Perhaps not. Though speaking of image, Nolan, the bank called again about Dash. Mother. Nolan's voice carried a warning. Not now. I looked around the table, at my husband's tightened jaw, at Madison's perfectly practiced smile, at Tessa's barely concealed glee at my discomfort. 6 years I'd sat at this table, trying to earn my place. Maybe it was time to flip it instead. The first red flag should have been the locked office door. In 6 years of marriage, Nolan had never locked his home office. But there I was at midnight, picking the lock with a bobby pin, thanks to a YouTube tutorial and desperation. Oliver was sleeping over at Lorraine's, her idea of quality time that usually involved undermining my parenting. But tonight, it worked in my favor. The lock clicked. I slipped inside, Phone flashlight illuminating stacks of papers scattered across Nolan's desk. Bank statements, credit card bills, and something else, documents with my signature that I definitely hadn't signed. My hands trembled as I picked up a loan agreement. There was my name, authorizing a second mortgage on our house. The date was 3 months ago when I'd been at a fitness conference in Denver. Looking for something? I jumped, dropping the papers. Grant stood in the doorway, his usual hesitant expression replaced with something harder. Jesus, Grant. What are you doing here? Tessa forgot her phone after dinner. He stepped in, closing the door. But we both know that's not the important question right now. I gathered the fallen papers, mind racing. Does Tessa know you're here?
No.
And she doesn't know about the loans either. He picked up one of the statements. But I'm guessing you didn't authorize this. How do you dash? I'm an accountant, Harper. I've been watching Nolan cook the books for months. He ran a hand through his hair. The restaurant's hemorrhaging money. These loans, the new wine cellar, Madison's salary, it's all smoke and mirrors. My throat tightened. Madison. How long? 3 months, officially. But there were others before her. Grant's voice softened. I wanted to tell you, but Tessa threatened you. The pieces were falling into place. Like she threatened to tell Lorraine about your gambling debts if you didn't marry her? His head snapped up. How did you dash? I have eyes, Grant. And unlike the Deckers, I actually pay attention to people instead of just talking over them. A door slammed downstairs. We froze. Harper. Nolan's voice carried up the stairs. Why are all the lights on? Grant moved quickly, grabbing his phone. Text me your email. I've got copies of everything, the real numbers, the forged signatures, all of it. Why are you helping me? He smiled sadly. Because someone needs to break this cycle. And it's not going to be me or Tessa. Footsteps on the stairs. I shoved the papers back into random piles as Grant slipped out the other door toward the guest bathroom. Nolan appeared in the doorway, Madison half hidden behind him. Both looked disheveled. Both wore guilty expressions that morphed into surprise. Babe, what are you doing in here? I held up a random bill. Looking for the internet password. Oliver's been asking to play that new online game, remember? At midnight, Madison stepped forward, smoothing her hair. That seems dedicated. Well, you know me. I smiled brightly. Always going above and beyond for my family. Speaking of which, how was your business meeting? Nolan's jaw tightened. Madison was just helping me with some paperwork. I'm sure she was. I moved toward the door, pausing beside them. By the way, Madison, you might want to fix your lipstick. It's smeared. She touched her mouth self-consciously as I brushed past. Harper, wait. Nolan caught my arm. It's not what you think. I looked down at his hand, then up at his face. You know what I think, Nolan? I think you should be very careful about what you do next. Because unlike your girlfriend's lipstick, some marks don't wash off so easily. I pulled away, heart pounding as I descended the stairs. Grant's bathroom door opened as I passed, and he gave me a slight nod. Outside, the night air hit my lungs like freedom. I pulled out my phone, creating a new email draft. Time to start documenting everything, the loans, the affairs, the lies. The Deckers had built their legacy on appearances, but I was about to show them what reality looked like. And reality, unlike Madison's lipstick, was going to leave a permanent stain. The lawyer's office felt too bright, too sterile for the mess I was about to unleash. Grant's financial documents lay spread across the mahogany desk while my attorney, Sarah Chin, reviewed them with narrowed eyes. This is extensive, she said finally. Multiple instances of forgery, unauthorized loans, misappropriation of funds. Your husband's been busy. My phone buzzed, another text from Nolan. I'd been dodging his calls since the office incident 3 days ago. Can we prove it? Oh, we can prove it. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? Before I could answer, my phone lit up again. This time, Lorraine's name flashed across the screen. I declined the call, but her text came through anyway. Oliver's asking for you. Stop this childish behavior, and come home. Home. The word stuck in my throat. Harper. Sarah's voice pulled me back. We need to discuss strategy. If we file criminal charges dash.
No.
The word came out sharper than intended. I mean, not yet. Oliver's already confused about why I'm staying at my friend's place. I don't want him to see his father arrested. Then what's your goal here? My goal. 3 days ago, it had been simple. Gather evidence, expose Nolan, protect Oliver.
But now.
I want out, I said finally. Clean break, fair settlement. But I need leverage to make sure the Deckers don't try to take Oliver. Sarah shuffled through the papers. Well, they certainly won't want this public. The restaurant's reputation dash. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Grant. Tessa knows something's up. She's been going through my office. Be careful.
Perfect.
Another fire to put out. What about the house? I asked. The second mortgage dash. A knock interrupted us. Sarah's assistant poked her head in. Sorry, but there's someone insisting on seeing Harper. Says she's family. Madison walked in before either of us could respond. She'd traded her red dress for a conservative blue suit, but her smile was just as practiced. Harper, we need to talk. Sarah started to object, but I held up a hand. It's fine. Give us a minute. Once we were alone, Madison's smile dropped. Nolan told me everything. Did he? Somehow I doubt that. He told me about the loans, about using your signature. She sat down, smoothing her skirt. What he didn't tell me was that you were his wife. I blinked. Excuse me? He said you were separated, that you were just hanging around for the money. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm not the other woman, Harper. I'm the one who got played. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. How long? 6 months. He said he was waiting for the right time to tell his mother about the divorce. She pulled out her phone, showing me texts, photos, hotel receipts. I have more. A lot more. Why are you showing me this? Because yesterday, I found out I'm pregnant. Her hands trembled slightly. And an hour ago, Nolan offered me money to take care of it quietly. Said something about family reputation. The room seemed to tilt. I thought about Oliver, about Lorraine's obsession with legacy, about Tessa's desperate need for validation. What do you want? What we both want, freedom from the Deckers. Madison stood. I'll email you everything I have. Use it however you need to. After she left, Sarah returned, eyebrows raised. Well, I looked at my phone. More missed calls from Nolan, another guilt trip text from Lorraine, a warning from Grant. The pieces of my old life, all demanding attention. Change of plans, I said, pulling out my laptop. I'm not just looking for a way out anymore. I'm going to make sure the Deckers can never hurt anyone else like this. That's a bigger fight. I know. I opened my email, starting to forward Madison's evidence. But some things are worth burning bridges over. My phone buzzed one final time. Oliver's face lit up the screen in a photo Lorraine had sent. He was smiling, but his eyes held that same uncertainty I'd seen at family dinners. Time to show my son what real strength looked like. The view count on my latest fitness video hit 100,000 as I sat in my temporary apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and determination. 2 weeks since I'd left the Decker mansion, and my online following had exploded. Turns out people loved the authenticity of a trainer dealing with real-life struggles. If only they knew the half of it. And that's how we turn emotional baggage into physical strength, I said to the camera, finishing my live stream. The comments flooded in, mostly supportive, some flirtatious, and one that made my blood freeze. Interesting content, Harper. Mother would be devastated to see the Decker name associated with this.
Spectac.
Tessa. Before I could respond, my phone rang.
Grant.
Tessa's planning something, he said without preamble. She's been meeting with the bank manager who approved Nolan's loans. I glanced at the stack of legal documents on my kitchen counter. Let me guess. Trying to bury the evidence?
Worse.
She's trying to prove you were complicit, that you knew about the forgeries and benefited from them. The irony almost made me laugh. With what proof? Your fitness business. The timing of its growth, the equipment purchases. She's spinning it like you were laundering money through Dash. A knock at my door cut him off. Through the peephole, I saw Madison, looking pale and determined. I have to go, I told Grant. Keep me posted. Madison burst in as soon as I opened the door. Nolan knows. About the baby, about me talking to you. He's threatening to expose my past if I don't sign something saying I lied about everything. What past? She sank onto my couch. I was arrested in college. Prescription drug charges, expunged record. But if it gets out, your career would be over.
Ich sat beside her.
Just like my reputation if Tessa's plan works. My phone buzzed with a text from Lorraine. Oliver keeps asking why his mother abandoned him for internet fame. Perhaps it's time to discuss custody arrangements. The threat was clear. I showed Madison the message. They're trying to break us both, she said quietly. No. I stood up, an idea forming. They're trying to control us. But they forgot something important. What's that? I pulled up my live stream analytics. We have audiences. People who trust us. And the Deckers' whole world revolves around reputation. Madison's eyes widened. You want to go public? Not with everything. Not yet. I opened my laptop. But what if we started telling our stories? Not as victims, but as women refusing to be silenced. Nolan would dash. React exactly like the Deckers always do, trying to shut us up, throwing money at the problem. I smiled grimly. And every attempt would just prove our point. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Lorraine, this time with a photo of Oliver looking sad at their dinner table. The manipulation was obvious, but it still hurt. They're using your son, Madison observed. They're using him now. But one day he'll be old enough to understand the truth. I turned to her. The question is, what truth do we want him to learn? That his mother gave in to protect him, or that she fought to show him what integrity looks like? Madison touched her stomach absently. And my baby? What truth will they learn? That depends on what we do next. I pulled up my video editing software. Want to help me plan tomorrow's live stream? She hesitated, then nodded. What's the topic? Breaking free from toxic legacies. I started typing. And I think it's time to introduce my special guest, the woman who helped me find my voice. As we worked, more messages poured in. Threats from Tessa, manipulative pleas from Lorraine, increasingly desperate texts from Nolan. Each one strengthened my resolve. The Deckers had spent generations building their legacy on secrets and control. Time to see how it held up under the spotlight of truth. I glanced at Madison, saw the same determination in her eyes. Tomorrow, we'd start telling our story. And unlike the carefully curated Decker family narrative, this one would be raw, real, and impossible to silence. Let them try to maintain their precious reputation when faced with authentic truth. The live stream had been live for exactly 6 minutes when the Deckers' lawyer sent the cease and desist letter. By minute 12, Lorraine had filed an emergency custody petition. At minute 15, Nolan walked into my apartment using his old key. Turn it off, he said quietly, standing just out of camera view. Madison, sitting beside me on the live stream couch, gripped my hand. The viewer count kept climbing 15,000 and rising. I said, turn it off, Harper. Nolan's voice carried that familiar edge, the one that usually made me back down. Not today. Welcome to the stream, Nolan, I said instead. Want to tell our viewers about the forged loan documents? Or should Madison share her story first? He moved faster than I expected, reaching for the laptop. But I was faster, years of training making me quick. The laptop clattered to the floor, camera still rolling. You're destroying everything, he hissed. The restaurant, the family name Dash. You did that yourself. I positioned myself between him and Madison. Every loan, every lie, every woman you manipulated. Manipulated? He laughed, but his eyes darted to the still streaming laptop. I gave you everything. A home, a family name, status Dash. You gave me debt and betrayal. I pulled out my phone, showing him the custody petition. And now you're trying to take my son. Mother's idea. He stepped closer. But we can fix this. Turn off the stream, sign some papers. We'll say it was all a misunderstanding dash. Like you want Madison to say her pregnancy is a misunderstanding? His face darkened. You have no idea what you're doing. Actually, a new voice said, I think she does. Grant stood in the doorway, holding up his phone. He'd been recording everything. Tessa's watching the stream, he said, along with about 20,000 others now, including some interesting names from the restaurant industry. Nolan's mask cracked. Grant, you don't understand. The restaurant's finances are a mess, I finished. But you can still do one right thing. Sign the divorce papers. Clean split, joint custody, no contests. Or what? His smile turned cruel. You'll ruin the family? Destroy Oliver's inheritance? Some mother you are. The words hit hard, playing on every doubt I'd wrestled with. But then I heard it, a small sniffle from behind me. Madison, hand protectively over her stomach, tears in her eyes. Something snapped. You want to talk about family? I turned to the laptop, speaking directly to the camera. Let me tell you about the Decker family legacy. About a restaurant built on forged loans and stolen dreams. About a man who uses women like disposable napkins and a family that covers up his messes. Harper Nolan started. I'm not finished. My voice stayed steady. To every woman watching who's been told to stay quiet for the family name, who's been manipulated into thinking she's crazy or ungrateful, you're not alone. And you don't have to stay. The viewer count hit 30,000. Nolan's phone buzzed. Then Grant's. Then mine. All with the same message from Lorraine. Come to the house.
Now.
All of you. Damage control, Grant muttered.
No.
I looked at Madison, saw my own determination reflected back. This is where we make our stand. They'll destroy us, she whispered. They'll try. I picked up the laptop, addressing the audience one last time. Stay tuned, everyone. We're taking this show on the road. I ended the stream, but kept Grant's phone recording as we headed to our cars. Nolan followed, making calls, probably to lawyers. My phone lit up with a text from Sarah Chin. Bold move. Hope you know what you're doing. I didn't. Not really. But as I watched Madison straighten her shoulders and Grant stand a little taller, I realized something important. Sometimes the worst moments aren't when we're at our lowest, but when we finally see clearly what we're fighting for. And I was done fighting alone. Ready? I asked my unlikely allies. Madison nodded. Grant gripped his phone tighter. And somewhere in the Decker mansion, a family legacy built on secrets was about to meet its match. Time to show them what real strength looks like. The Decker mansion felt different at night. Colder. Like the facade had finally cracked enough to show the rot underneath. We found them all in the formal dining room. Lorraine at the head of the table, Tessa beside her, Oliver sleeping on the window seat. My heart clenched at the sight of my son. Lorraine's power move, using him as a chess piece. Quite the performance, Lorraine said, gesturing to the chairs. Though I expected better from you, Grant. Grant remained standing, phone still recording. I expected better from all of you. Enough. Nolan slammed the door behind us. Mother, I can handle Dash. Handle what? Tessa's voice cracked. The viral video? The pregnancy? Or the fact that your little financial games are about to destroy everything? Madison stepped forward. I'm not a game. No. Tessa laughed bitterly. You're just another stupid woman who fell for my brother's act. Like Harper. Like all the others. Something in her tone made me pause. Others? How would you know about Dash? Because she sent the photos. Grant's quiet words dropped like bombs. Tell them, Tess. Tell them how you've been documenting Nolan's affairs for years. Building your insurance policy. The room went still. Tessa's face drained of color. Is this true? Lorraine's voice could have frozen hell. Someone had to protect the family, Tessa whispered. Nolan was getting sloppy. The women, the loans. I kept the evidence in case we needed leverage. Leverage. Nolan advanced on his sister. You were supposed to help me hide it. Like you helped me? Tessa stood, trembling. When father died, and you took control. When you promised I'd have a place in the business, then shut me out? I shut you out because you're unstable. I'm unstable? You forged your wife's signature. You got your mistress pregnant. Oliver stirred at the shouting. I moved toward him, but Lorraine blocked my path. Don't you dare, she hissed. This family dash is toxic. I pulled out my phone, showing her the live stream comments still pouring in. Your precious legacy is built on manipulation and lies. And now everyone knows. We can fix this, Nolan insisted. Harper, if you just sign these. I pulled out the divorce papers. Clean break, joint custody, no contests. Or tomorrow I release proof of every loan, every affair, every cover-up. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I met his eyes. I'm not afraid of you anymore. None of us are. This is absurd, Lorraine started, but Madison cut her off. I'm keeping my baby, she announced. And I'm testifying about the financial fraud. So am I, Grant added. Tessa laughed suddenly, a broken sound. You know what's funny? I sent those photos to Harper thinking it would drive her away quietly. Instead, she looked at her brother. She did what I never could. She fought back. You betrayed me, Nolan growled. No.
Tessa pulled out a USB drive.
I documented you, betraying all of us. And now. She slid it across the table to me. I'm choosing a different legacy. Oliver sat up, rubbing his eyes. Mommy? The room fell silent as he padded over to me. I lifted him up, feeling his small arms around my neck. We're going home, baby. The papers, I reminded Nolan. Your choice. Sign them now, or tomorrow the world sees who you really are. He stared at his son, then at Madison, then at the ruins of his carefully constructed world. A pen, he said finally. Mother, give me a pen. As he signed, I looked at Tessa. Why now? She touched her own stomach so subtly I almost missed it. Because some legacies aren't worth preserving. We left them there. Lorraine staring at her shattered dynasty, Nolan facing his consequences. Tessa holding Grant's hand for perhaps the first time in years. Outside, the night air felt clean, like freedom. Ready for a new chapter? I asked Oliver. He nodded against my shoulder, already half asleep. Behind us, Madison and Grant followed, all of us stepping into a future unburdened by the weight of false legacies. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's walking away and building something better from the ashes. 6 months can change everything. Our new apartment overlooked the park where Oliver and I did our morning superhero poses. Smaller than the Decker mansion, but filled with actual warmth. My online fitness empire had exploded. Turns out authenticity sells better than perfection. Mommy, look. Oliver pointed to his tablet. Aunt Tessa's baby bump. I glanced at the social media post. Tessa and Grant standing outside their modest suburban home, her pregnancy finally showing. The caption read, "Building a different kind of legacy."
The doorbell rang.
Madison stood there, her own bump now prominent, holding a manila envelope identical to the one that had started everything. The final settlement papers, she said, stepping inside. The restaurant's being sold to pay off the debts. Thought you might want to know. And Nolan, taking a job as a line cook in Seattle. She smiled wryly. Apparently, starting from the bottom builds character. Oliver ran over, showing her his tablet. Look, 2 babies coming. 3, actually. I gestured to Madison's stomach. Your new cousin will have plenty of playmates. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, how the Decker dynasty would continue, just not in the way Lorraine had planned. Speaking of whom, Harper. Lorraine's voice behind us made me turn. She stood in my doorway, looking smaller somehow, more human. I brought Oliver's old baby photos. I thought, perhaps the new mothers might want to see what their children might look like. It was an olive branch, awkward but sincere. Come in, I said. We're just about to have lunch. As Oliver showed his grandmother his latest superhero drawings, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. Final forensic accounting report complete. Want me to file charges? I looked at Lorraine, seeing past the designer outfit to the worried grandmother beneath. At Madison, who'd found her voice along with her freedom. At Oliver, who deserved to know his family. All of it, broken pieces and all. No, I texted back. Some debts can't be paid with prison time. Mommy, can we show them my new video? Oliver bounced excitedly. The one about strong families? I pulled up my latest fitness channel post, building strength from broken places, featuring Oliver demonstrating kid-friendly exercises while I talked about emotional resilience. The comment section was filled with stories from other parents finding their way through similar struggles. You've built something remarkable, Lorraine said quietly. Very different from what we had. Different isn't always worse, Madison added, one hand on her stomach. My phone buzzed again, a message from Tessa. Starting Lamaze classes next week. You too want to join? Strength in numbers. The old me would have hesitated, would have searched for the trap or hidden agenda. But that Harper was gone, replaced by someone who understood that real strength comes from building bridges, not burning them. We'd love to, I replied, then looked at Madison. Both of us. Oliver climbed into my lap, his small hand finding mine. Mommy, are we still superheroes? I thought about the journey, from that first envelope of photos to this moment. About revenge transformed into redemption, about justice softened by mercy, about protection becoming empowerment. We're something better, I told him. We're survivors who learn to thrive. Lorraine dabbed at her eyes, Madison smiled, and somewhere across the city, a sold restaurant sign came down as new stories began. The Decker legacy hadn't ended. It had evolved, splitting like a river into multiple streams, each finding its own path to the sea. Some carrying pain, others hope, all of them somehow necessary for the journey. Who wants to do superhero poses? Oliver asked. We all stood. The betrayed wife, the other woman, the controlling mother-in-law, the innocent child, forming an unlikely circle in my living room. Ready? I asked, not just about the poses. They nodded, and together we stretched towards something new, something real, something strong enough to weather any storm. Because sometimes the happy ending isn't about winning or losing. Sometimes it's about finding the strength to begin again, and the wisdom to do it better this time.
I've always had a sixth sense about when something was off with Mark, my husband of 6 years. It was one of those quiet evenings, the kind where you can hear the clock ticking in the background, that I noticed it. Mark was lost in thought, staring blankly at his half-eaten dinner. Mark, what's up? You've barely touched your food, I said, trying to sound casual. He glanced up, forcing a smile. It's nothing, Clara. Just tired, I guess. I knew better than to buy that. Mark was many things, but a good liar wasn't one of them. Come on, spill it. You've been off since you got home. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right, it's my mom. She called today. My heart sank a little. Linda, my mother-in-law, was... Well, let's just say she was a character. She lived life on her own terms, which usually meant being at odds with how the rest of us saw the world. What did she say? I asked, bracing myself. She wants to see Jake, he said, referring to our 4-year-old son. I was taken aback. It had been years since Linda had shown any interest in us, especially after the falling out we had. I couldn't help but remember the last time we were all together. The way she had a comment about everything, from how I dressed to how I should be raising Jake. I tried to keep my tone light. Wow, that's unexpected. What did you tell her? Mark shrugged. I said I'd talk to you about it. There was an uncomfortable silence. I knew what he was asking. Despite everything, he wanted his mother to be a part of our son's life. But the memories of her past intrusions, her unasked for advice, and her peculiar ways were too fresh in my mind. Okay, I finally said. She can see him, but I have conditions. Mark looked relieved, but cautious. Like what? She only visits when I'm around. No unsupervised time with Jake, and no pushing her. Beliefs on him. He nodded, understanding the unspoken fears behind my conditions. Fair enough. I'll let her know. As I cleared the table, my mind raced with questions. Had Linda changed? Could I trust her around Jake? I wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. I'd do anything to protect my son. And if that meant facing Linda head-on, so be it. That night, as I tucked Jake into bed, his innocent smile reminded me of what was at stake. I kissed his forehead, promising silently to keep him safe from whatever Linda might bring into our lives again. The day I first met Linda is etched in my memory like a scene from a movie you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. Mark and I were engaged, and he had been prepping me about his mother all week. "She's a bit different, Clara. Just keep an open mind, okay?" he had said, a nervous chuckle escaping him. I wasn't sure what he meant by different, but I was about to find out. We drove up to a quaint, slightly overgrown house on the outskirts of town. The door swung open before we even got out of the car, and there she was, Linda, in all her glory. Barefoot, with a tie-dye dress flowing around her ankles, she seemed to glide rather than walk towards us. Her hair was a cascade of gray waves, and her eyes sparkled with a kind of mischievous energy. "Mark! And you must be Clara!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a surprisingly strong embrace. "Welcome to my sanctuary." The house was like a museum of esoteric artifacts. Crystals hung in the windows, and the smell of incense filled the air. Linda chatted nonstop as she showed us around, her topics ranging from astrology to herbal remedies. As we settled down for tea, she began talking about her lifestyle. "I've been a vegetarian for decades now. Meat clogs the soul, you know. And I draw energy from the earth, that's why I don't wear shoes." I exchanged a glance with Mark. He shrugged as if to say, "I told you." I tried to keep up with the conversation. "That's interesting, Linda. I've never met anyone who lives like this." "Oh dear, there's so much to life that people miss out on. Did you know I'm part of a community that practices sun nourishment? We believe in absorbing energy directly from the sun." I didn't even know what to say to that. I mean, how do you respond to someone who thinks they can eat sunlight? Mark jumped in, probably seeing my struggle. "Mom, why don't you tell Clara about your yoga retreats?" Linda's face lit up. "Oh, they're divine. Yoga is not just exercise. It's a way to align your chakras and cleanse your aura." The rest of the visit passed in a blur of Linda's tales about her travels and spiritual awakenings. It was overwhelming, to say the least. On the drive home, I turned to Mark. "Your mom is certainly unique," I said, trying to find the right words. Mark chuckled. "That's one way to put it. You okay?" I nodded, still processing the experience. "Yeah, just a lot to take in. She's different, all right." Our wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and it was, mostly. Linda managed to keep her unconventional comments to a minimum, which I was grateful for. But the real challenge began after the wedding when I found out I was pregnant. I remember breaking the news to Mark and Linda over dinner at our place. Mark was overjoyed, grinning from ear to ear. Linda, on the other hand, had a different reaction. "Congratulations, my dears. This is a sacred time. You must be very careful about the energies around you, especially during pregnancy," she said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and seriousness. I smiled politely, not really sure how to respond. "Thanks, Linda. We're really excited." As my pregnancy progressed, Linda started showing up more often, unannounced, with all sorts of herbs and books on ancient pregnancy practices. One evening, she came over with a big basket filled with who knows what. "Clara, darling, I've brought you some natural remedies and superfoods. These will ensure a healthy and spiritually aligned pregnancy," she announced, laying out her collection on our kitchen table. I glanced at Mark, who seemed as perplexed as I was. Thanks, Linda, but my doctor has already given me a diet plan to follow." Linda waved her hand dismissively. "Doctors don't know everything. Trust me, these are age-old practices. They've helped women for centuries." Feeling a bit cornered, I decided to let her have her way, thinking it couldn't hurt to try some of her superfoods. That was my first mistake. Days turned into weeks, and Linda's influence over my diet and lifestyle grew. She convinced me to switch to a strict vegetarian diet, cutting out all meat and dairy. I started feeling tired all the time, but Linda assured me it was just my body detoxing. Your body is cleansing itself, Clara. It's all part of the process, she'd say every time I brought up my fatigue. One day, I was at the grocery store, picking up some vegetables as per Linda's pregnancy diet, when everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor with a crowd of people around me. I woke up in the hospital with Mark by my side, looking worried. The doctor came in, a stern look on his face. "Mrs. Johnson, you fainted because of severe nutritional deficiencies. This diet you've been on is dangerously low in protein and other essential nutrients. It could have harmed your baby," he explained. I was in shock. All this time, I thought I was doing what was best for my baby, but instead, I was putting both of us at risk. Mark was furious. "I can't believe this. Mom has gone too far this time." I nodded, feeling a mix of anger and guilt. I never should have listened to her. "I'm sorry, Mark." "We'll fix this, Clara. No more of Mom's advice. From now on, we stick to what the doctor says," he said, squeezing my hand. That incident was the turning point. I realized that Linda's intentions, however well-meaning, were not always right. It was a hard lesson learned, but one that I needed to protect my family. After the hospital incident, things changed between Linda and us. Mark and I decided it was best to limit her influence, especially regarding my health and our baby. But Linda, being who she was, didn't take this lightly. A few days after I was discharged from the hospital, Linda called. I braced myself as I answered the phone. "Clara, dear, how are you feeling?" Linda's voice was laced with concern, but I could sense the underlying tension. "I'm better, thanks. The doctor has me on a new diet plan now," I replied cautiously. There was a pause on the other end. "I heard about what happened. I'm just so worried about you and the baby. You know, conventional medicine doesn't always know best." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Linda, I appreciate your concern, but the doctor was very clear. The diet you suggested wasn't right for me. It put the baby at risk." Linda's tone shifted, becoming more defensive. "I've been studying these practices for years, Clara. I know what I'm talking about. You can't just dismiss ancient wisdom because of one doctor's opinion." I felt a surge of frustration. "It's not just an opinion, Linda. I fainted. The baby could have been hurt. I can't take that risk again." There was a heavy silence before Linda spoke again. "I just want what's best for you and the baby. You're part of our family now, and it's my duty to share my knowledge." I knew this conversation was going nowhere. "Linda, I need to do what's best for my health and the baby's. That means following the doctor's advice." I could almost hear her shaking her head in disbelief. "You're making a mistake, Clara, but it's your choice. I just hope you realize that before it's too late." The call ended shortly after, leaving me feeling drained and uneasy. I knew Linda meant well in her own way, but her refusal to acknowledge the danger she had put us in was alarming. I looked over at Mark, who had been quietly listening. "We're doing the right thing, right?" I asked, needing his reassurance. He came over and hugged me. "Absolutely. We have to put you and the baby first. Mom will just have to understand that." The tension with Linda came to a head a few weeks later. She had been calling, leaving messages about various natural remedies and practices she thought we should consider for the baby. Mark and I had agreed to stand our ground, but facing Linda was easier said than done. One afternoon, Linda showed up unannounced. She had a bundle of herbs in her hand and a determined look in her eyes. I opened the door, my heart sinking. "Clara, I've brought some herbal supplements for you. They're vital for the baby's development," she said, pushing past me into the house. I closed the door, taking a deep breath. "Linda, we've talked about this. I'm following the doctor's advice now. I can't use those." Linda set the herbs on the table, her expression hardening. "Clara, you're being closed-minded. These are ancient remedies, proven to work for centuries." I could feel my frustration mounting. "Linda, I appreciate your help, but what you suggested before was dangerous. I can't risk my baby's health." She turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. "I'm only trying to help. You're rejecting valuable knowledge. Do you think you know better than generations of wisdom?" Mark walked into the room, sensing the rising tension. "Mom, enough! We've made our decision. Clara's health and the baby's safety are our priority." Linda's gaze shifted between us. a mix of anger and disbelief on her face. "I can't believe you're choosing to ignore my advice. I'm your mother, Mark, and you, Clara, are carrying my grandchild." I tried to keep my voice calm. "Linda, it's not about ignoring you. It's about doing what's medically best for the baby." Linda shook her head, her voice rising. "You're both making a huge mistake. When something goes wrong, don't come running to me." With that, she stormed out, leaving the herbs on the table. Mark and I exchanged a look, both of us drained. "That could have gone better," he said, a sad note in his voice. "Yeah, but we had to stand our ground," I replied, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. After that day, Linda stopped calling and visiting. It was a painful estrangement, but Mark and I knew we had made the right choice for our family's well-being. And now she has reappeared in our lives, after several years of absence. What will happen next? I didn't know that. The day Linda came to visit, I felt a mix of apprehension and hope. After Mark relayed her request to see Jake, our 4-year-old, I had agreed, setting my own terms. She could visit, but only in my presence. As she stepped into our home, I braced myself for what was to come. "Hi, Linda," I greeted her cautiously, watching as her eyes instantly found Jake, who was playing on the living room rug. Linda smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Hello, Clara. And is this the young man I've heard so much about?" Jake looked up, curious but shy. "Hi," he mumbled, clutching his toy car. The visit started smoothly, with Linda making small talk and playing with Jake. She seemed different, more considerate, and less imposing than before. It was a relief, yet I couldn't shake off my guard completely. As we sat down for tea while Jake played nearby, Linda's conversation took a familiar turn, but with a new twist. "I've been exploring more into alternative medicine, Clara. It's fascinating how much we can heal naturally, without any pills or chemicals." I tensed, memories of her past advice flooding back. "That's interesting, Linda, but I believe in a balance between natural remedies and conventional medicine." Linda nodded, but there was a hint of her old stubbornness in her voice. "I understand, but I've moved past conventional medicine entirely now. I've never felt better." I chose my words carefully. "It's great that it works for you, Linda. But for Jake, I prefer to stick to the advice of his pediatrician, especially when it comes to medications." Linda paused, her expression thoughtful but not argumentative. "I respect your decision, Clara. I just want what's best for Jake, in my own way." The visit ended on a positive note, with Linda promising to return soon. After she left, I sat down, trying to process everything. It was a step forward, but Linda's complete turn away from conventional medicine worried me. Could I really trust her to respect our choices for Jake's well-being? I shared my concerns with Mark that night. "She's trying, I can see that. But her views on medicine, it worries me." Mark nodded, understanding. "We'll just have to be vigilant, Clara. We can't let our guard down." As I went to check on Jake, sleeping soundly in his bed, I knew this was just the beginning. Rebuilding trust with Linda would be a delicate balance, one we'd have to navigate with both our hearts and minds open. It had been a few weeks since Linda's first visit, and things were going surprisingly well. She had been respecting our boundaries, and her visits had become a regular part of our weekends. That's why I didn't worry too much when I had to run some errands one Saturday, leaving Jake with Mark. I was browsing through the aisles of the grocery store when my phone rang. Seeing Mark's name flash on the screen, I answered cheerfully. "Hey, everything okay at home?" "Clara, I had to rush to work for an emergency. I left Jake with Mom. She insisted it was fine." Mark's voice was hurried and tense. My heart skipped a beat. "You left him with Linda? Alone?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. I know, but I didn't have a choice. It was really urgent," he replied. I cut the call short, my mind racing. I abandoned my shopping cart and rushed to Linda's house. As I pulled into her driveway, I could feel the unease settling in my stomach. I knocked on the door, and Linda opened it, a forced smile on her face. "Hello, Clara. Jake's here. We've been having a lovely time." "Where is he, Linda?" I asked, stepping inside. "In the living room," she said, leading the way. I found Jake on the couch, his face red from crying, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his arm. My heart dropped. "Jake, sweetie, what happened?" I rushed to his side. He winced as I touched his arm. "I fell down, Mommy. It hurts." I turned to Linda, my voice shaking. "What did you do to him?" Linda's expression was one of nonchalance. "Oh, he just had a little fall. I put some fern and a bandage on it. It's a natural remedy." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A natural remedy? Linda, he needs a doctor. This could be serious. Linda shrugged. "He's fine, Clara. Kids fall all the time. He'll be okay." I didn't wait another second. Scooping Jake up in my arms, I headed straight to the car, Linda's protests fading behind me. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed my worst fear. Jake had a fractured arm. I sat there, holding his hand while they put a proper cast on, fighting back tears of anger and guilt. Mark arrived soon after, his face a mask of worry and regret. "I'm so sorry, Clara. I should have never left him with her." We both knew that trust had been broken. Linda's refusal to see the seriousness of the situation was the last straw. As much as it pained us, we knew we had to keep her away from Jake, for his safety. That night, as I tucked Jake into bed, his small face illuminated by the nightlight, I promised myself that I would always protect him, no matter what. The lesson was clear. Sometimes, love means having to make hard decisions for the greater good. The confrontation with Linda was inevitable. After the incident with Jake, Mark and I were united in our resolve. We needed to make Linda understand the gravity of her actions. When Linda arrived at our home, there was a palpable tension in the air. She seemed unaware of the seriousness of the situation, her demeanor casual as she greeted us. "Clara, Mark, how's Jake doing?" Linda asked, as if nothing significant had happened. I took a deep breath, my words laced with controlled anger. "Linda, Jake had a fractured arm because of your negligence. We need to talk about this seriously." Linda waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, come on, Clara. Kids get hurt all the time. I did what I thought was best." Mark's face reddened with anger. "What you thought was best? You ignored basic safety, Mom. You could have seriously harmed our son." Linda scoffed. "I'm his grandmother. I was taking care of him. You're blowing this out of proportion." Her casual dismissal of our concerns was like a slap in the face. "Blowing this out of proportion? Linda, he could have had more than just a fracture. You refused to get him proper medical attention." I shot back, struggling to keep my voice steady. Mark stepped forward, his voice rising. "You're not understanding the seriousness of your actions, Mom. We can't trust you with Jake anymore. Not after this." Linda's expression turned to one of mock surprise. "Really? You're going to keep me away from my grandson over this?" "It's not just this, Linda. It's about his safety, something you've repeatedly taken for granted," I said firmly. The argument escalated, with Linda refusing to acknowledge her fault and Mark and I insisting on the new boundaries we needed to set. The conversation reached a boiling point, and Linda stood up abruptly. "You know what? Fine. If you're going to be this unreasonable, maybe I shouldn't be part of your lives at all," Linda spat out, her voice laced with bitterness. Mark, usually the peacemaker, didn't back down. "If that's what it takes to keep Jake safe, then so be it." With a final glare, Linda stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The room was thick with tension long after she left. I turned to Mark, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Did we just do the right thing? Mark wrapped his arms around me. "We did, Clara. It's our job to protect Jake, no matter how hard it is." As we stood there, holding each other in the silence of our home, I knew that this was the end of a chapter in our lives. A painful, necessary end. We had stood our ground for Jake's sake, and while the future was uncertain, I knew we'd face it together, stronger and more united than ever.
My name is Emily, and this is my story. It's not your typical fairy tale, but it's mine, and I wouldn't change a thing. I'm 29, have a great job, a loving husband, Alex, and a cozy little house we call home. But life wasn't always this kind to me. 10 years ago, I was a different person. At 19, I found myself lost in a whirlwind of corporate parties and social drinking. It started innocently enough, a drink here, a party there. But before I knew it, alcohol became my crutch, my escape from stress and loneliness. Those 3 years are a blur, a time I'd rather forget but can't. Everything changed when I hit rock bottom and realized I needed help. I turned to a special center where people like me, battling their demons, found solace and strength. It was hard, but I came out sober and have been that way ever since. Alcohol? Can't stand it now. It makes me sick just thinking about it. 2 years ago, I met Alex. He was different from anyone I'd ever known. Kind, understanding, and he had this way of making me laugh even on my worst days. We had a whirlwind romance, and I knew he was the one. But I couldn't start a life with him holding on to my secret. So, one evening, I told him everything. My struggles, my rehab, my sobriety. I remember how nervous I was, sitting there on our old couch, fidgeting with the hem of my shirt. Alex listened quietly, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, there was a long pause, and my heart was racing. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Emily, your past doesn't define you. It's who you are now that matters." He hugged me, and at that moment, I knew I was safe with him. We got married a year later. It was a beautiful ceremony, simple yet perfect. But then came the reception, and with it, my first encounter with Diane, Alex's mother. I always knew she was a bit intense. But that day, she cornered me with a question that caught me off guard. "Why aren't you drinking, Emily? It's your wedding," she asked, a glass of champagne in her hand. I felt my throat go dry. Alex had told me to be honest, so I was. "I don't drink, Diane. I used to have a problem with alcohol, but I've been sober for years now." The look on her face was a mix of shock and something else. Contempt? It was hard to tell. "An alcoholic," she muttered under her breath. I felt my heart sink. Alex jumped in. "Mom, it's not like that. Emily's overcome so much. She's the strongest person I know." Diane didn't say anything more, but her cold stare stayed with me. That was the beginning of our rocky relationship. Little did I know, it was just the tip of the iceberg. After the wedding, life with Alex was everything I dreamed of. But there was a shadow hanging over us, and that shadow had a name. Diane, my mother-in-law. She never said anything outright about my past, but her disapproval was clear as day. It started with small comments. "I'm just surprised Alex chose someone with your history," she'd say, or, "In our family, we usually handle our problems without making a fuss." Each word was like a tiny needle poking at my confidence. One Sunday, we were invited to dinner at Diane's. Alex was in the kitchen helping his dad with the grill, and I was left alone with Diane in the living room. The air was stiff with unspoken words. "So, Emily, how's work?" Diane asked, not even looking up from her magazine. "It's going well, thanks. Just finished a big project," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. She hummed, her eyes still on the pages. "I just hope you're not overworking yourself. We wouldn't want any old habits to resurface." I felt a flush of anger, but I bit my tongue. Arguing with Diane wasn't going to help. "I'm doing fine, Diane. Thanks for asking." Alex walked in then, saving me from more of Diane's jabs. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, glancing between us. "Perfect," Diane smiled, as if our previous conversation never happened. "Just chatting with Emily about her job." The dinner was tense, at least for me. Diane played the gracious hostess, but her eyes kept darting to me, like she was waiting for me to slip up. I stuck to water, even though the wine was flowing freely around the table. After dinner, when we were alone, I told Alex how I felt. "I don't know, Alex. It's like she's always judging me, waiting for me to make a mistake." Alex put his arm around me. "I know my mom can be tough, but she just needs time. She'll come around, you'll see." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Diane had made up her mind about me, and nothing I did was going to change it. The drive home was quiet. I stared out the window, lost in thought. Alex reached over and squeezed my hand. "We'll get through this, Em, together." A few months had passed since the wedding, and Alex's family planned a big gathering. It was a sort of annual tradition, a summer barbecue where everyone from his side of the family would come. I was nervous, but Alex reassured me that it would be fine. The day was sunny and warm, perfect for a barbecue. Everyone was there, aunts, uncles, cousins. The backyard buzzed with laughter and chatter. I tried to blend in, helping with the food and setting up tables, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Diane was there, of course, floating around, greeting everyone. Then, during lunch, she called for everyone's attention. My heart sank. I had a feeling I knew what was coming. "Family," Diane began, her voice loud and clear. "I think it's important we all know who we're welcoming into our family. Emily, here, has a past. She's a recovering alcoholic." The words hung in the air. I felt every eye in the backyard on me. My face burned with embarrassment and anger. Before I could say anything, Alex's Uncle Mike, who I hadn't spoken to much before, stood up. "Well, Diane, since we're sharing, I might as well say I'm 10 years sober myself. It's not easy overcoming something like that. Takes a lot of courage and strength." I looked at him, surprised and grateful. Diane's face tightened, but Mike continued. "I think what Emily has done is remarkable. She should be commended, not judged." Then, one by one, other relatives started chiming in. "We all have our struggles, Diane," said Alex's cousin Sarah. "Emily's past doesn't define her." Even Alex's grandmother, a sweet but stern woman, added her voice. "Diane, dear, this isn't the time or place. Let's be a family that supports, not one that tears down." Diane was outnumbered. She mumbled something about just being concerned and walked off. Alex came over and gave me a tight hug. "See? They love you." The rest of the afternoon went surprisingly well. Uncle Mike even shared a bit of his own story with me, and I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't expected. It was like his words had broken some invisible barrier, and I found myself chatting and laughing more freely. As we drove home, I felt a mix of emotions. I was still upset about Diane's stunt, but I was touched by the unexpected support from Alex's family. "Your family is amazing, Alex," I said, leaning back in the seat. "Yeah, they're pretty great," he replied, smiling. "And now they're your family too." The support from Alex's family at the barbecue gave me a much-needed boost, but Diane wasn't the type to give up easily. I started noticing little things that didn't sit right with me. It began with a casual family dinner at Diane's house. She had always kept a few bottles of wine around, but that night, the dining room looked like a minibar. Bottles of all sorts were displayed prominently. I caught her eyeing me, almost as if she was daring me to take a drink. "Mom, you've outdone yourself with the drinks," Alex commented, unaware of the tension. "Oh, you know me? I like to have options for our guests," she replied, her voice too sweet. I stuck to water, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just hospitality. A few days later, Alex and I were at home when he mentioned something that made my heart drop. "Mom's been suggesting I should relax more, have a drink in the evening. She even gifted me some fancy scotch." I tried to keep my voice steady. "That's nice of her, but you don't have to drink if you don't want to." He laughed. I know. Just thought it was a bit odd, her insisting on it." That's when it hit me. Diane wasn't just targeting me. She was trying to weave alcohol back into our lives through Alex. The last straw was a conversation I accidentally overheard. I was at Diane's house, helping her set up for another family event. I thought she was in the garden, so I was surprised when I heard her voice coming from the living room. Peeking in, I saw her talking on the phone, not noticing me. "I'm telling you, she'll slip up eventually. Diane was saying. "If she's around alcohol enough, she'll go back to her old ways. Then Alex will see I was right about her." I felt sick to my stomach. She was plotting against me, trying to make me relapse. I didn't know what to do. Confront her? Tell Alex? I felt trapped and scared. At home, I sat Alex down and told him everything. The drinks at dinner, the scotch, and what I overheard. He was shocked. "Mom wouldn't do that, Emily. Maybe you misunderstood." "I wish I did, Alex, but it's all adding up. She's trying to make me drink again." Alex looked torn, caught between his wife and his mother. "Let me talk to her, okay? This has to be a misunderstanding." The days after my talk with Alex were filled with tension. He said he spoke to Diane, but things didn't change much. I was on edge, always careful around her, especially with drinks. Then, something wonderful happened that brought a glimmer of hope. I found out I was pregnant. Alex and I were over the moon. We shared the news with Diane, hoping it might soften her attitude. "Oh, a baby," Diane said, her voice flat. "That's news. Congratulations." Her reaction was underwhelming, but I didn't let it bother me. I was too happy about the baby. A couple of weeks later, Diane invited us over for dinner again. I was cautious, given her recent behavior, but Alex convinced me to give her another chance for the sake of family harmony. Dinner started off well enough. Diane was on her best behavior, or so it seemed. Then came dessert, a cake that Diane had baked herself. "It's a special recipe," she said, serving us generous slices. I took a bite and immediately knew something was off. There was a strong taste of alcohol, cognac maybe. I put my fork down, feeling nauseous. "Diane, is there alcohol in this cake?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked surprised, then chuckled. "Oh, just a splash for flavor. It's completely cooked off. Don't be so dramatic, Emily." I pushed the plate away, feeling betrayed and sick. Alex was frowning. "Mom, you know Emily doesn't drink. Why would you add alcohol to the cake?" Diane's attitude shifted. "It's just a cake, Alex. If she's so sensitive, maybe she shouldn't be eating dessert." I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself and went outside for air. Alex followed me. "I'm sorry, Em. I don't know what's gotten into her." "I told you, Alex. She's doing this on purpose. She knows I'm pregnant and still she—" Alex hugged me. I know. I'll talk to her again. This isn't right." But talking seemed pointless. Diane had crossed a line. I couldn't trust her, not with me, not with our baby. And the worst part? I felt like Alex was still struggling to see how deep this went. That night, I lay awake, thinking about everything. Diane's actions, Alex's reluctance to fully confront her, our baby's future. I needed to protect my family, but I felt so alone in this fight. The incident with the cake stayed with me. I couldn't shake off the feeling of betrayal. I tried to talk to Alex about it, but it felt like he wasn't fully grasping the seriousness of his mother's actions. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, and I decided to bring it up again. "Alex, I can't stop thinking about the cake Diane made. It's like she's testing me, pushing my limits." Alex looked up from his book, his expression one of concern mixed with frustration. "Em, I know it seems that way, but maybe you're reading too much into it. Mom can be insensitive, but I don't think she's doing it to hurt you." I felt a surge of frustration. How can you say that? After everything? She's not just being insensitive, she's being malicious. And with the baby on the way, I don't feel safe around her. Alex sighed, putting his book down. "I know you're upset, but that's still my mom you're talking about. Maybe we just need to give her some space, let things cool down." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Give her space. Alex, she's trying to sabotage me. I overheard her planning it. What more proof do you need? He ran his hands through his hair, a sign that he was getting stressed. "I just can't believe she'd go that far. I'll talk to her again, okay? I'll make her understand that she can't keep doing this." But his words didn't reassure me. It felt like he was still in denial about his mother's intentions. And the more he tried to downplay it, the more isolated I felt. The next few weeks were tough. I started avoiding Diane as much as possible, which wasn't easy with all the family events. And every time I had to see her, I was on high alert, worried about what she might say or do. Then one day, something happened that made me question everything. Alex and I were at a family barbecue, and I overheard a conversation between Diane and one of her friends. "Yes, I've been trying to get through to Emily," Diane was saying, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm just worried about her, with the baby and all. You know how she used to be." Her words stung. It was like she was painting herself as the concerned mother-in-law while making me look like an unstable mess. I confronted Alex about it on the drive home. "She's telling people she's worried about me, making it sound like I'm a ticking time bomb." Alex's response was quiet, uncertain. "Maybe she's just trying to find a way to connect with you, in her own way." I felt a rush of disappointment. Her own way? By making me look bad? "Alex, why can't you see what she's doing?" He didn't have an answer, and the rest of the drive home was silent. The tension in our home was becoming unbearable. Alex was trying to keep the peace, but I could see he was torn. I knew I had to do something drastic to show him the truth about his mother. One night, I sat him down at our kitchen table. "Alex, I have an idea, but I need you to trust me. It's the only way to show you what your mom is really like." He looked hesitant. "What are you thinking?" "I want to set up a sting operation. I'll pretend to fall off the wagon, get drunk, and call your mom over. We'll see how she reacts when she thinks I'm alone and vulnerable." Alex was shocked. That's a big risk. What if it backfires?" "It's a risk I'm willing to take. I need you to see her true colors. Will you help me?" After a long pause, he nodded. "Okay, I'll do it, but I'll be right there, hiding, just in case." The plan was simple but risky. A few days later, I called Diane, pretending to be drunk. "Diane, can you come over? I'm not feeling good. Alex is at work, and I don't know what to do." I could hear the eagerness in her voice. "I'll be right there, Emily." We set everything up. Empty wine bottles were scattered around, and I lay on the couch, pretending to be passed out. Alex hid in the bedroom, ready to come out when needed. Diane arrived in record time. As soon as she saw me, a smile spread across her face. "I knew it. I knew you'd slip up eventually." I stayed still, listening as she continued. "You're going to ruin my son's life. But don't worry, I'll make sure he knows the truth about you." Then she said something that chilled me to the bone. "It's better this way. If you lose the baby because of your drinking, it's for the best." That's when Alex stormed out of the bedroom. "Enough, Mom! How could you say such things?" Diane turned, her face a mix of shock and anger. "Alex, what is this? Why are you here?" He was livid. "I heard everything, Mom. How could you be so cruel? How could you want harm to come to Emily and our baby?" Diane tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. Alex had heard everything. He told her to leave and not come back until she could accept and respect us. After she left, Alex turned to me, his eyes filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I should have believed you. I never thought she could be so hateful." I was shaken, but relieved. "It's okay, Alex. Now you know. We need to protect our family, and that includes protecting ourselves from your mom." He hugged me tight. "You're right. You and the baby are my priority. I'm sorry it took me so long to see the truth." After the confrontation with Diane, there was a palpable shift in our home. Alex was deeply troubled by his mother's actions and words, and I could see the conflict tearing at him. We knew things couldn't continue as they were. A few days later, Alex sat down across from me, a serious look in his eyes. "I spoke to Mom," he began, his voice heavy. I tried to explain how her actions and words have hurt us, especially what she said about the baby. I held my breath, bracing myself. And how did she take it? He shook his head, pain etched on his face. She wouldn't listen, Em. She just kept saying things, terrible things. She called our baby the child of an alcoholic. She refuses to accept you or our child as part of the family. I felt a sharp sting in my heart. The words cut deep, but I wasn't surprised. So what happens now? Alex reached for my hand, his grip firm. I told her she's not welcome in our house anymore, not until she can respect us and our family. I can't let her hurt you or our baby. The finality in his voice was something I'd never heard before. Are you sure about this, Alex? She's your mother. He nodded, resolute. I am. You and our baby are my priority now. I love my mom, but I can't allow her to continue treating us this way. The decision to cut ties with Diane was a hard one, especially for Alex. But it was necessary for the well-being of our little family. We needed peace, stability, and love, things that Diane, in her current state, couldn't offer. In the following weeks, we focused on each other and the arrival of our baby. It was a time of mixed emotions. There was the joy of anticipation, but also the sadness of the rift in the family. Yet, through it all, Alex and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the challenges we had faced. As I looked ahead, I knew there would be more obstacles, more tough decisions, but I also knew that together, Alex and I could face anything. We had chosen a path of love and respect for ourselves and for our child. And that made all the difference.
My name is Anna. I'm 34 and married to the love of my life, Michael. We live in a cozy house I inherited from my parents, nestled in a quiet suburb. Michael and I have been trying for a baby, but it's been a road marked with heartaches. I've had miscarriages, and each one feels like a piece of my heart being chipped away. Michael is a kind man, the kind who'd give you the shirt off his back. That's exactly what he's been doing for his family. His mother, Mrs. Thompson, and his sister Laura, with her 2 kids, have always relied on him. Laura's divorced and lives with Mrs. Thompson, trying to maintain a lifestyle that her alimony can't support. This morning, as I was setting the breakfast table, Mrs. Thompson walked in, her voice dripping with fake concern. Anna, dear, I was just telling Michael how brave you are, coping with... Well, you know, she said, glancing at my empty womb. I forced a smile. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. We're hopeful. Laura sauntered in, her eyes scanning the room like she owned the place. Michael, aren't you a saint, supporting us and dealing with... everything, she said, throwing a pitying look my way. Michael, ever the peacemaker, quickly changed the subject. Let's enjoy breakfast. I've got news about the house. As we sat down, Michael announced, I've put all my savings into this house. It's our future, Anna's and mine. So I might need to cut back on some expenses. Mrs. Thompson's face tightened, and Laura dropped her fork. But Michael, what about us? We depend on you, Laura exclaimed. I know, but Anna and I need to plan for our future too, Michael replied, his voice firm yet gentle. After breakfast, as Michael left for work, Mrs. Thompson pulled me aside. You do realize, dear, if you can't give him a child, our Michael might rethink this whole arrangement, she whispered venomously. I felt a lump in my throat, but managed to say, Michael and I are in this together. We'll figure it out. As they left, I stood in the doorway, watching them drive away. I knew this was just the beginning. The house, my sanctuary, was now a battleground, and I had to brace myself for what was to come. Life at home became a constant juggling act. Michael left for work early and came back late, often tired and oblivious to the tension that filled the house during his absence. The days were long, filled with silent battles and unspoken words. It was a Wednesday, I remember, because that's when Laura usually dropped her kids off at our place, treating it like some free daycare. I was in the kitchen, brewing coffee, when Laura strolled in, her kids trailing behind her. Anna, Make sure they do their homework, okay? I've got errands, she said, barely looking at me. Of course, Laura, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. But I also have things to do today. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, you can manage. What else do you have to do around here anyway? After Laura left, her kids, Ella and Max, sat at the kitchen table. I tried to help them with homework, but my mind kept drifting to Laura's words. It felt like she saw me as nothing more than a convenient helper in her busy life. Later in the afternoon, Mrs. Thompson dropped by. She had a way of entering without knocking, as if she owned the place. Anna, dear, I need to talk to you about something, she said, sitting down uninvited. What is it, Mrs. Thompson? I asked, bracing myself. It's about Michael. He's been working so hard. I'm worried you're not taking good enough care of him. A man needs his wife to be more supportive, she said, her eyes scrutinizing me. I do my best, Mrs. Thompson. Michael knows that, I replied, feeling my cheeks warm up. She sighed, a theatrical display of disappointment. Well, I suppose you do what you can. But remember, a happy husband is the key to a happy home. And right now, this house doesn't feel very happy. Her words stung, but I kept my composure. I'll keep that in mind, I said, even though every part of me wanted to tell her how unfair she was being. As evening approached and Michael returned, the atmosphere changed. Mrs. Thompson became the doting mother, and Laura turned into the caring sister. They laughed and chatted with Michael, making the house seem like the happiest place on earth. But I knew better. I knew the warmth was superficial, a facade maintained for Michael's sake. Behind closed doors, their true colors showed, colors of indifference and selfishness. And I, caught in the middle, had to find a way to navigate through these turbulent waters, holding on to the hope that someday things would get better. The situation at home started to eat away at me. Laura's constant demands and Mrs. Thompson's subtle digs became a daily ordeal. My conversations with Michael about his family were going nowhere. He just couldn't see what I was dealing with every day. One evening, after a particularly hard day, I decided to bring it up again with Michael. We were in the living room, the TV playing some show neither of us was watching. Michael, we need to talk about your mother and Laura, I said, turning off the TV. He looked up, surprised. What about them? It's just, they're here all the time, and it's really starting to get to me. Laura leaves her kids here without even asking, and your mother, she has a way of making me feel small. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. Anna, they're family. They're going through a tough time. We need to be there for them. But what about us, Michael? What about our life together? I asked, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I know it's hard, but they need me. They need us. Can't you just try a little harder for me? His words felt like a slap. Try harder? Michael, I'm at my breaking point. I need you to see that. There was a long silence, the kind that's heavy and filled with things left unsaid. Finally, Michael stood up. I need some air, he said, and left the house. I sat there, alone, feeling more isolated than ever. The man I loved, the man I'd hoped would be my partner in all things, seemed miles away, lost in a sense of duty to a family that didn't respect me or our marriage. The next day, things got worse. Laura came over, unannounced as usual, but this time she brought boxes of her stuff. What's all this? I asked, bewildered as she started to fill the living room. I'm moving in for a while. Mom's house is just too cramped with the kids and all, she said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Moving in? Here? I couldn't hide my shock. Yeah, just for a bit. You don't mind, do you? After all, we're family, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I stood there, watching as my home, my sanctuary, was slowly taken over. The sense of invasion was overwhelming. I felt a deep sense of loss, not just for the peace of my home, but for the understanding and support I so desperately needed from Michael. That night, lying in bed, I realized that something had to change. I couldn't live like this, constantly pushed to the edge in my own home. The breaking point had been reached, and it was time to make some tough decisions. For my sanity, for my marriage, something had to give. Laura's move into our house felt like an unwelcome invasion. Every morning started with the chaos of her kids running around and her taking over the kitchen as if it were her own. Mrs. Thompson visited more frequently, adding to the tension. One morning, I found Laura sprawled on the couch, flipping through a magazine, while her kids made a mess in the living room. I'd barely had my first sip of coffee. "Laura, could you please keep an eye on Ella and Max? They're making quite a mess," I said, trying to keep my tone light. She glanced up, unfazed. "Oh, they're just kids, Anna. Let them be. You're too uptight." I clenched my jaw, feeling a surge of frustration. "It's not about being uptight, Laura. This is still my house, and I'd like to keep it somewhat orderly." Laura rolled her eyes and went back to her magazine. "Fine, I'll handle it. But you could be a little more accommodating, you know." Her words stung, and I left the room, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. Later that day, Mrs. Thompson arrived. She walked in without knocking, as always, and started criticizing the moment she saw me. "Anna, dear, this place is a mess. What have you been doing all day?" she said, surveying the room with a look of disdain. "I've been trying to work from home, Mrs. Thompson. It's not easy with the kids around," I replied, my patience wearing thin. She tisked and shook her head. "A good wife would manage better. You should take lessons from Laura. She knows how to handle a household." I bit my lip, holding back the retort that was on the tip of my tongue. Arguing with her was pointless. That evening, when Michael came home, the house was buzzing with his mother's and sister's laughter. As usual, they transformed in his presence, becoming the picture-perfect family. I watched them from the kitchen, feeling like an outsider in my own home. When Michael came in to get a drink, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Michael, this can't go on. Your sister and your mother are taking over our home. I feel like I'm living in a stranger's house," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. Michael looked surprised, then concerned. "Anna, I had no idea it was this bad. I'm sorry. I'll talk to them." His words offered a glimmer of hope, but deep down, I wondered if anything would really change. The invasion of my privacy and space had taken a toll, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. The house that once felt like a haven now felt like a battleground, and I was losing ground every day. The day unraveled into a nightmare I could have never imagined. Laura and Mrs. Thompson burst into the house, their faces twisted with a ghoulish glee that sent chills down my spine. "Anna, pack your things. You need to leave now," Laura announced, barely able to contain her excitement. Stunned, I stammered, "What? Why should I leave my own house?" Mrs. Thompson, smiling in a way that curdled my blood, said, "Oh dear, didn't you hear? A policeman just called. Michael was hit by a car near his work. He's dead, and now everything here is ours." My world stopped spinning. "Dead? Michael can't be—" I couldn't finish the sentence, the words dissolving into a sob. "That's right. And since you have no children, this house reverts to his family, us. So, you need to leave," Laura added, her eyes scanning the room like she was already calculating its worth. I felt numb, my heart aching in a way that defied words. "But this house, it's mine. I inherited it," Mrs. Thompson snorted. "That doesn't matter now. Michael's gone and we're his family. We'll be taking over." They began to walk around the house, appraising each item, discussing how much they could sell things for. Their callousness in the face of my supposed tragedy was surreal, almost like a twisted play being acted out in front of me. "But the police, they called you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, clinging to some thread of hope that this was all a mistake. "Yes, dear. They said they identified him by his broken cell phone," Mrs. Thompson said casually, examining a vase as if deciding its fate. I sank into a chair, my mind racing, trying to grasp the reality of Michael's death and the vultures circling around his memory. The home we had shared, filled with love and dreams, had turned into a cold, mercenary ground. As they continued their morbid inventory, something inside me broke. The grief, the shock, the sheer inhumanity of it all. I was supposed to be mourning my husband, not defending my home from these scavengers. But as I watched them, a small, defiant part of me began to rise. Michael wouldn't have wanted this. He wouldn't have wanted me to be cast out by his own family, especially not in a home that was rightfully mine. I knew then that I had to fight, for Michael, for myself, and for the life we had built together. As Laura and Mrs. Thompson continued their macabre appraisal of my home, a sudden noise at the door made us all freeze. The door opened, and to my utter disbelief, Michael walked in, alive and unharmed. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. "Michael!" I cried out, rushing to him. "What's going on here?" Michael asked, his eyes quickly moving from my tear-streaked face to his sister and mother, who stood there in shock. "Michael, they told me you were dead," I sobbed, clinging to him. Mrs. Thompson recovered first, her voice trembling. "The police called. They said someone was hit by a car, and they found your broken phone with him." Michael's expression hardened. "My phone was stolen near my office this morning. I reported it, but didn't expect this." Laura stammered. We just assumed." "You assumed I was dead and decided to throw my wife out of her own house?" Michael's voice was cold, a tone I had never heard from him before. Mrs. Thompson tried to interject. "No, Mom, enough!" Michael interrupted her. "Stop playing the show. I heard everything. I can't believe you would stoop this low." I stood there, still in shock, but a wave of relief washed over me. Michael was alive, and he saw the true colors of his own family. He turned to me, his eyes softening. "Anna, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what they were really like." Laura and Mrs. Thompson, now realizing their plan had crumbled, began to scramble for excuses. But Michael wasn't having any of it. "You need to leave, now," he said firmly. "But Michael, this is our family home," Laura protested weakly. "It's Anna's home," Michael corrected her, "and you have no right to be here after what you've done." As they gathered their things, I looked at Michael. He seemed like a different person, stronger and more resolute. The unveiling of his family's true nature had changed something in him and in us. After they left, the house was silent, but it was a comforting silence. Michael and I sat down, a million words unspoken between us. We had a lot to talk about, a lot to heal from. But in that moment, I knew we would face it together. The unveiling had been painful, but it was the start of something new for us. A new beginning, built on truth and a renewed bond. The aftermath of the revelation left Michael and me sitting in a heavy silence. He was the first to break it, his voice low but filled with a newfound determination. "I can't believe my own mother and sister would do something like this," he said, shaking his head. I took his hand, finding strength in our shared disbelief. "I know, it's hard to understand, but at least now we know their true intentions." Michael nodded. "They only cared about the money, the house, not about us, not about you." I sighed, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. "I tried to tell you, but I never imagined it would come to this. We need to set things straight, Anna. I need to make sure they never do this to us again," Michael said, his jaw set. The next day, Laura and Mrs. Thompson came back. Their demeanor changed. They were no longer the confident, greedy women, but seemed almost sheepish. "Michael, we didn't mean for things to go this far," Laura started, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, it was just a misunderstanding," Mrs. Thompson added, her voice lacking its usual authority. Michael looked at them, his expression unreadable. "A misunderstanding? You celebrated what you thought was my death and tried to kick my wife out of her own house. There's no misunderstanding there." I stood by Michael, feeling a surge of pride in his resolve. Laura fidgeted, looking anywhere but at us. We thought we were losing everything. We panicked." "And that justifies your actions?" Michael's tone was incredulous. Mrs. Thompson tried to reach out to him. "Michael, you're our family. We just got scared." Michael stepped back. "Family doesn't do what you did. I can't just overlook this." The air was thick with tension, and for a moment nobody spoke. Then Michael continued, "I want you both to leave. We need space and time to heal from this." Laura and Mrs. Thompson exchanged glances, realizing the gravity of the situation. Without another word, they left, their heads bowed. Once they were gone, Michael turned to me. "I'm sorry, Anna, for everything. I should have listened to you." I hugged him, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "It's okay, Michael. We'll get through this together." That evening, as we sat in our living room, the house felt like ours again. The intentions of Laura and Mrs. Thompson had been exposed, and in facing that ugly truth, Michael and I had found a new sense of unity. We were ready to move forward, leaving the pain and deceit behind us. A few days after the unsettling revelation, life seemed to return to a semblance of normalcy. That was until Mrs. Thompson and Laura showed up again, acting as if nothing had happened. They barged into the living room where Michael and I were sitting, sipping our morning coffee. "Michael, we've been thinking. We still need your financial support, for the kids in the house," Mrs. Thompson stated, her tone demanding. Laura chimed in. "Yes, Michael. You can't just abandon your nephews. They need your help." I looked at Michael, sensing his growing frustration. He set down his cup with a calmness that belied his anger. "Mom, Laura, after everything that's happened, you still expect me to support you financially?" Michael's voice was steady but firm. "Yes, it's your duty as a son and a brother," Mrs. Thompson insisted, her eyes hard. Michael stood up, his resolve clear. "No, Mom. I've made my decision. I'm not going to continue supporting you like before. I have my own family to think about." Laura's face turned red with anger. "But you have nephews, Michael. They need money." Michael looked at her, then at me, and said, "I will support my nephews, but in a much more limited way. Anna and I have plans. We're going to adopt a child." I gasped, a pleasant shock washing over me. Adoption? The idea filled me with an unexpected joy. Mrs. Thompson and Laura looked at each other, their faces twisted with anger. "You're choosing strangers over your own blood?" Laura spat out. "It's not about that, Laura. It's about building the family I choose," Michael replied, his gaze unwavering. With no further words, Mrs. Thompson and Laura stormed out, their departure leaving a trail of tension in the air. Once they were gone, Michael turned to me, his expression softening. "Anna, adopting a child is just the beginning. I believe we will have our own children too one day." His words, full of hope and promise, brought tears to my eyes. I reached out, taking his hands in mine. "Michael, that's the most wonderful thing I could hear. A family, our family, however it comes to us." We embraced, a sense of peace enveloping us. The challenges we had faced with his family had only strengthened our bond. Now, looking towards the future, we saw a world of possibilities. A world where our love could extend to a child in need of a home, and perhaps, one day, to children of our own. The chapter of struggles and pain was closing, and a new chapter, full of hope and love, was beginning. Together, we were ready to write it, one day at a time. My name is Laura, and a year ago, my life seemed to take a turn straight out of a fairy tale. I met Alex at a friend's birthday party. He was charming, with a smile that could light up the room, and before I knew it, we were dating. Fast forward to now, we're engaged and planning our wedding in 3 months. I'm 24, living in my small but cozy apartment. It's not much, but it's mine. Alex still lives with his mom, Mrs. Wilson, in their family home. We've talked about buying our place after the wedding, a dream I often find myself lost in. Mrs. Wilson, well, she's a character. Always calling Alex, even when we're on dates. It's like she has a sixth sense for when we're together. I've tried to see it as a mother's love, but it can be a bit much. Then, 3 months before the wedding, Mrs. Wilson called me with an offer I never expected. "Laura, dear," she began in her usual formal tone, "I think it's time you start learning how to be a proper wife and mother for my Alex." I remember pausing, unsure of what to say. Mrs. Wilson, I'm not sure I understand." "It's simple," she continued. "You'll come over to our house every day for the next 3 months. I'll teach you everything you need to know about running a household." I was taken aback. This was not what I expected. "Every day? After work?" I asked. "Yes, dear. It's for your own good. And Alex's, of course." I hesitated, but a part of me didn't want to start off on the wrong foot with my future mother-in-law. "Okay, Mrs. Wilson, I'll give it a try." "Oh, wonderful. Alex will be so pleased. See you tomorrow evening then. I hung up the phone, a mix of nerves and uncertainty churning in my stomach. Little did I know, this was the beginning of what would be the most challenging 3 months of my life. Are you sure about this, Laura? My best friend Sarah asked later that day. We were sitting in my tiny living room, a half-eaten pizza between us. I don't know, Sarah. It seems important to Mrs. Wilson. And Alex, well, he thinks it's a good idea too. Sarah frowned, looking concerned. Just be careful, Laura. This sounds like a lot. I nodded, trying to shake off the worry. I'll be fine. It's just for a few months, right? But as I would soon find out, those few months would change everything. The next few weeks blurred into a routine I never imagined I'd be in. Every day, after a long day at work, I'd drag myself to Mrs. Wilson's house. The moment I stepped through the door, it was like entering a different world. Laura, you're here! Good, Mrs. Wilson would greet me, barely looking up from her knitting. Let's start with dinner. I expect you to cook something nice for us. The kitchen became my battleground. I was never a bad cook, but under Mrs. Wilson's critical eye, I felt like a complete novice. This is how you chop onions? My goodness, girl, you're slow. And watch your fingers, she'd chide, making me even more nervous. One evening, as I struggled to get the seasoning right for a stew, Alex walked in. I hoped for some support, or at least a kind word. Smells good, Laura, he said casually, grabbing a soda from the fridge. Thanks, I replied, trying to sound cheerful. I'm just trying to get it right. Mrs. Wilson has been teaching me a lot. He laughed, a sound that once brought me joy, but now felt distant. Mom knows best. You're lucky to have her guidance. I wanted to say something, to tell him how exhausted I was, but the words wouldn't come out. I just nodded and went back to stirring the stew. Every task was a test. Washing dishes, ironing Alex's shirts, even vacuuming the house. Mrs. Wilson had a specific way for everything, and nothing I did seemed to meet her standards. You need to iron the creases sharper, Laura. Alex likes them that way, she instructed one evening as I struggled with the ironing board. I tried to hide my frustration. I'll keep that in mind, Mrs. Wilson. And so it went. Days turned into weeks. I kept telling myself it was a phase, something to endure for Alex's sake, for our future. But as I lay in bed each night, my body aching and my mind racing, I couldn't help but wonder if this was really what my life was going to be. A never-ending cycle of trying to please someone who seemed impossible to satisfy. My friends started noticing the change in me. You look tired, Laura, Sarah commented one day. Is everything okay? I forced a smile. Just busy with the wedding prep and all. You know how it is. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the wedding stress. It was this new life I had stepped into. One where I was constantly trying to prove myself to a woman who seemed determined to find fault in everything I did. And the worst part? I was beginning to lose sight of who I was in the process. The weekdays were tough, but the weekends brought a whole new level of challenge. Mrs. Wilson hosted her relatives almost every Saturday, and I was expected to cook and cater for all of them. It was a Saturday morning, and I was already in the kitchen, a long list of dishes to prepare. Mrs. Wilson entered, her arms crossed. Remember, Laura, my family has high standards. You need to impress them, she said, eyeing the ingredients I had laid out. I nodded, feeling the pressure. I'll do my best, Mrs. Wilson. As the day progressed, the kitchen felt more like a pressure cooker. I was chopping, stirring, and baking, trying to keep up with the endless list of tasks. The clock seemed to tick louder with each passing minute. The guests began to arrive, and the house filled with chatter and laughter. I was in the kitchen, putting the final touches on the dishes, when Alex popped his head in. Need any help, Laura? He asked, leaning against the doorway. I wanted to say yes, to tell him I was overwhelmed, but I didn't. No, I've got it. Thanks, though. He shrugged and left, joining the laughter in the other room. I felt a pang of loneliness, realizing how isolated I had become in this house. Dinner was served, and I stood back as everyone started eating. I watched nervously, hoping they'd like the food. Mrs. Wilson's sister, Aunt Linda, was the first to comment. This is quite different. Not what we're used to, right, Margaret? Mrs. Wilson gave me a disapproving look. Laura is still learning. She's doing her best." The critiques didn't stop. Each dish seemed to bring another round of subtle digs and comments. I felt smaller with each word. After dinner, while everyone was relaxing in the living room, Mrs. Wilson cornered me in the kitchen. "Laura, this was not up to our family's standards. You need to work harder. You made me look bad in front of everyone," she hissed. I felt tears well up in my eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson. I really tried." "Trying isn't enough. You need to do better. Much better." I nodded, trying to hold back my tears as I started clearing the dishes. Later, Alex found me in the kitchen, alone, washing dishes. "Hey, don't take it to heart. Mom can be tough," he said, in a tone that was supposed to be comforting. I looked at him, my frustration finally finding words. "Alex, it's not just tough. It's too much. I'm trying so hard, and it's never enough." He seemed taken aback. "It's just how she is. She wants everything to be perfect. Don't worry, you'll get used to it." Get used to it. Those words echoed in my head as I went to bed that night. Was this what my life was going to be? Constantly trying to meet impossible standards and losing myself in the process? The thought scared me more than anything. Just when I thought things couldn't get tougher, they did. Alex's sister Julia started dropping her kids off at Mrs. Wilson's house every weekend. Julia had 2 kids, a 4-year-old boy, Max, and a baby girl, Lily. Looking after them became my responsibility. One Saturday morning, Julia breezed in with the kids in tow, her casual demeanor in stark contrast to my growing anxiety. "Hey, Laura! Great, you're here! The kids will be your little project for today," Julia said, barely giving me a chance to respond. All day?" I asked, trying to mask my surprise. "Yeah, I have a ton of errands. You don't mind, right?" Julia didn't wait for my reply, swiftly heading out the door. There I was, with 2 kids, in addition to the usual weekend chores. Max was energetic and needed constant attention, while Lily needed her diaper changed and bottle-fed. Juggling between them and the kitchen was exhausting. Mrs. Wilson was of no help. "You need to learn, Laura. This is what family life is about," she said, observing me struggle with Lily and a fussy Max. By the time Julia returned in the afternoon, the house was a mess, the kids were cranky, and I was on the brink of tears. "What happened here?" Julia exclaimed, looking around the disarrayed living room. "I tried my best, Julia. Max and Lily needed a lot of attention," I explained, feeling defeated. "Well, you'll just have to get better at managing, won't you? After all, you'll have your own someday," Julia said nonchalantly, rounding up her kids. That night, after everyone had left and I was alone cleaning up, Mrs. Wilson came into the kitchen. "You need to pull yourself together, Laura. Today was not acceptable," she said, her tone cold and firm. "I'm doing everything I can, Mrs. Wilson," I replied, the day's frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's not enough. You need to be more efficient, more organized. That's what being a part of this family means," she retorted before leaving the kitchen. As I sat there, surrounded by toys and dirty dishes, I felt a sense of hopelessness. This wasn't the family life I had dreamed of. It was a never-ending cycle of demands and criticisms. And with each passing day, my spirit, my very essence, seemed to be eroding away. I wondered if Alex understood or cared about how much I was struggling. But deep down, I knew the answer, and it scared me more than anything. Exhaustion became my constant companion. It followed me to work, where I found myself struggling to focus. One afternoon, it caught up with me. I was at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, when my eyes involuntarily closed. I jerked awake to the sound of my name. "Laura, are you okay?" It was my boss, Mrs. Thompson, standing by my desk with a concerned look. I sat up quickly, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson. I didn't sleep well." She pulled up a chair and sat down. "This isn't just about last night, is it? You've been looking run down for weeks. What's going on?" I hesitated, but the words just came pouring out. I told her about the wedding preparations, Mrs. Wilson's training, the weekends with Alex's niece and nephew, everything. Mrs. Thompson listened quietly, her expression turning from concern to disbelief. "Laura, this isn't training or preparation. It sounds like you're being used. You're not a maid or a nanny. You're supposed to be their family," she said, her voice firm. Her words hit me hard, but I thought I was doing it for Alex, for our future. Laura, a relationship is a partnership. It's about support and respect, not servitude. You need to think about whether this is the life you want. Her words echoed in my head as I left her office. For the first time, I allowed myself to really think about everything that had been happening. Was this really what I wanted? Was I happy? That evening, as I made my way to Mrs. Wilson's house, I felt a growing sense of dread. The familiar tasks awaited me, but now they felt even more burdensome. During dinner, Mrs. Wilson was her usual critical self. "Laura, this chicken is overcooked. You really must pay more attention." I looked up from my plate, something inside me snapping. "I'm trying my best, Mrs. Wilson. I work all day and then come here and try to do everything you ask." She looked at me, surprised by my outburst. "Well, your best isn't good enough. You need to try harder." I wanted to say more, to tell her how unfair she was being, but I couldn't find the words. I just nodded and went back to my dinner, a storm of emotions brewing inside me. Later that night, I lay in bed, Mrs. Thompson's words replaying in my mind. I realized that I had been so focused on trying to please Mrs. Wilson and Alex that I had lost sight of my own happiness. For the first time, I questioned whether this wedding, this future with Alex, was what I truly wanted. It was a scary thought, but it was the wake-up call I desperately needed. The next day, a heavy feeling sat in my chest as I went about my work. Mrs. Thompson's words had opened a door I couldn't close anymore. I knew I had to face the reality of my situation. That evening, I took an early leave from work, and instead of heading straight to Mrs. Wilson's house, I decided to take a detour. I needed some time to think, to clear my head. But as I drove around, a nagging thought kept pulling me back. I arrived at Mrs. Wilson's house earlier than usual. I didn't call ahead, which was out of the ordinary for me. The house was unusually quiet as I let myself in with the key Alex had given me. I was about to call out when I heard voices from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed closer. It was Mrs. Wilson, Alex, and his sister Julia, their voices a mix of laughter and hushed tones. "And she just keeps coming back for more," I heard Julia say, her voice tinged with amusement. "I know, it's hilarious. Laura thinks she's proving herself, but really, she's just a free housekeeper. And after the wedding, she'll be completely under our control," Mrs. Wilson chimed in, a note of triumph in her voice. I felt my heart pound in my chest. This couldn't be happening. "And the best part is, she buys all the groceries with her own money. We haven't spent a dime," Alex added, laughing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My Alex, the man I loved, was in on this too. I stepped into the living room, unable to contain my shock and anger. "How could you?" I blurted out. The three of them turned to me, their expressions shifting from amusement to shock. "Laura, how long have you been standing there?" Mrs. Wilson stammered. "Long enough," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't believe I fell for all of this. I thought we were a family." Alex stood up, his face a mix of guilt and confusion. "Laura, it's not what you think. We were just joking around." "A joke?" I laughed bitterly. "I've been slaving away for months, thinking I was building a life with you, and you were all laughing at me." Mrs. Wilson tried to interject. "Laura, dear, you're overreacting. We only wanted the best for you." "The best for me? By treating me like a servant? By making fun of me behind my back?" I couldn't hold back the tears. Julia was quiet, avoiding my gaze, while Alex seemed at a loss for words. "I thought I was joining a family. I thought I was loved, but I was just a convenience to you all," I said, the reality of the situation sinking in. "Laura, please, let's talk about this." Alex started, but I held up my hand. "No, Alex, there's nothing left to talk about. I can't be a part of this farce." I turned and walked out the door, leaving behind the house, the people, and the life I once thought I wanted. In that moment, I felt a mix of pain and relief. It was over. The truth was out, and I was finally free from the illusion I had been living in. I barely slept that night, my mind replaying the conversation over and over. By morning, my decision was clear. I couldn't marry Alex. I couldn't be part of a family that saw me as nothing more than a tool to be used. I went to Mrs. Wilson's house one last time, needing to end things officially. My heart pounded as I rang the doorbell. Alex opened the door, his eyes red, like he hadn't slept much either. "Laura, I'm glad you're here. We need to talk," he said, his voice hopeful. I stepped inside, my resolve firm. "We can talk, but my decision won't change." Mrs. Wilson was in the living room, her usual stern look replaced with a softer, almost pleading expression. "Laura, please understand, we didn't mean any harm. It's just our way of testing your commitment," she said, trying to justify their actions. "Testing my commitment?" I repeated, disbelief coloring my tone. "By treating me like a servant and laughing at me?" Alex stepped forward. "Laura, I love you. I didn't want to hurt you. It's just, my mom's way can be a bit extreme." "Love isn't about testing and humiliating each other, Alex," I said, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. "I wanted a partner, a family, but what you all did, it's unforgivable." Mrs. Wilson sighed. "Laura, think about the wedding, the plans, the money we've spent." "I am thinking, Mrs. Wilson, about my dignity, my self-respect. The wedding is off. I can't marry into this family." Alex's face fell, his earlier hopefulness vanishing. "But Laura, we can fix this. Please, don't make a decision in anger." "It's not anger, Alex, it's realization. Realization that I deserve better," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Mrs. Wilson stood up, her demeanor changing. "You're making a big mistake, Laura. You won't find someone else who will treat you as well as we would have." I almost laughed at the absurdity of her words. I'd rather be alone than with people who don't respect me. Turning away from them, I walked to the door. Alex followed, his pleas fading with each step I took. "Laura, please." I stopped, turning to face him one last time. "Goodbye, Alex. I hope one day you understand why I had to do this." Walking away from Alex and his family felt like shedding a heavy burden, but it didn't end there. My phone became a constant reminder of the ties I was trying to cut. Alex and Mrs. Wilson kept calling, each time with a new plea or demand. One evening, as I was unwinding from work, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Wilson. I took a deep breath and answered. "Laura, you have to pay us back. We spent a fortune on the wedding arrangements," she demanded, her voice sharp and unyielding. I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and disbelief. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm not responsible for the expenses you chose to make. Consider that money as a lesson learned, or maybe a rehearsal for Alex's next wedding." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a huff. "You're being unreasonable, Laura." "I think I've been more than reasonable all this time," I replied, my voice steady. "Goodbye, Mrs. Wilson." And I hung up, feeling a sense of empowerment. The calls from Alex were harder. He was apologetic, his voice laced with regret. "Laura, please, I was wrong. I let Mom and Julia influence me too much. We can still make this work," he pleaded during one of the calls. "Alex, it's too late. I can't be with someone who didn't respect me enough to stand up for me," I said, the finality in my voice clear. "But I love you, Laura, I really do," he insisted, his voice cracking. "I deserve to be loved better, Alex. Take care of yourself." And with that, I ended the call, knowing it was the last time we would speak. The following days were a mix of emotions. There was relief, but also a sense of loss for what could have been. But as I reconnected with friends and dove back into my hobbies and work, I felt a renewed sense of self. One evening, while painting in my living room, I realized something profound. I was stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I had stood up against manipulation and disrespect, and in doing so, I had found my own voice. I didn't know what the future held, but I was optimistic. For the first time in a long time, I was excited about the possibilities ahead. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace whatever came my way.